Hello, everyone. So welcome to the live Q&A sessions on these issues of the survival journey. We are together with Soy and Kosal from Hakka. So welcome both Soy and Kosal. Yes. Oh, and we have many questions that came in, and Soy and Kosal already did answer some of the questions, but I think this is the opportunity where we would be able to let both of you expand more on those issues and questions. And also there are others questions that came in, I think after they have been, the audience have been watching your presentations. So I would start by asking the question that came in already. So the first questions that I would like to pick up on was asked by Melanie. What are the best practices in sustaining survival and ensuring that they are not re-victimized? I think that's very important issues. Yes. So any of you would like to start first?
Okay, I give the floor to Sui first, or Sui, you can start.
Sal, I think it's a best practice that you would be
That's okay.
ideal to talk to. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Okay, I think that is very important question, because that in terms of the question, it have the word sustainable. So based on our best practice in here in Cambodia condition, I think it can be useful for everyone is around in Asia, because that we have not very different context and very different issue related to these survivors. Okay, so as I mentioned in my written the answering, it is very we can say focusing on the survivor from Haga projects, that we're focusing on the survivor from human trafficking, modern slavery, sexual abusing, and also domestic violence. But in terms of human trafficking, we can say that very different life experience. So the service, the support, and the activity that we have to be applied, so very different as well, to make them sustaining. So in terms of this below, I could say that we have the four part that we can share to everyone. The first, we have to be careful about our case management and counseling service. This is our practice, and now we can say that we are expert on that, and also that here all survivor in our program, in our projects, and our targeted area, we provide directly to them by our counselor, to make sure their emotion, to make sure their feeling they get used, and also they are able to adapt the new life. So not 1 day or 2 days, but sometimes can be 1 year or 2 years based on their case. And especially at the same time, we provided our case management services that include a bit the whole journey. It means that we work with them since the beginning, since the open case until the closed case, to make sure that our survivor from human trafficking or another cases, they are able to live in their community back, to live with their origin community and families. This is one point that we should focusing, and also Haga have been doing it. Second point, and when the case happened, at least most of human trafficking, they move out from their own community, they move out from their origin village or family for a long time, sometimes 6 months, sometimes 6 years, sometimes over 10 years. Over 10 years, they just found them back. When they went to there, they were just children, but when found them working with them, they became adult already. So this is the one of the second point. We try to rebuild the connection and communication between the community and the family with our survivors. So in this stage, we have to be careful. We have to be careful, because that survivor sometimes they used to live with the condition of the traffic or of the domestic or of the any kind of bad for their life. So coming back to the community, we have to be careful. if we don't have the good communication or connection between the origin family and community with the survivor, probably they will come to live in the community and they become re-traumatized. They become re-traumatized again. So connection and communication between our survivor and community and origin family have to be built and have to connect it. And the third point is very important. You know that not only Haga, not only the survivor, but also another relevant stakeholder. They are the part of supporting to our survivor condition after we reintegrate them, reintegrating back to the community. Based on our experience, many issues happen when we focusing only on the survivor, but we forget focusing in the relevant stakeholder. For example, the survivor did not go to school when they were trafficked or when they were abused. But when they
Yeah.
came back to the community, they had to go back to the school. They had to go back to access to education, right?
Yeah.
But if we don't work with the local authority or with the relevant stakeholder, how could our survivor access to education and get the skill or get the knowledge? So that is why we mentioned here relevant stakeholder. We focusing on many part of the community and also authority and the government body as well. And
Yeah.
the last point, I mean, in terms of this is very important because that, not only working with this layer, but also another policy making or policy maker or politician, local authority, they have to be aware of the need of the survivors. I mean that they have to move all their investment or the focusing on the survival life because they are the victim of any kind of the bad thing in their life. So they come back here. The government should consider something to support directly to them. I want to share with you one real example. This morning, I joined the country human trafficking workshop conducted by our CSO and National Committee for Human Trafficking Counterparts, because and
Yeah.
CTT. This is very nice workshop, and I share a lot of idea about this, and they welcome. They recognize that the government did not have the package, the budget to support the survivor. They're depending on the CSO, and I informed them that CSO or NGO they have a short life, not long life like you. So you have to invest more social protection investment on your communities. That's in my word to the government. So welcome to this one. Everyone clap the hand and then say that, okay, very good. We will consider about that. This is our influencing approach that we try to show our real example and to make them agree with them. I think that's all for the question number one.
Yes, yes. Also, that's brilliant. I mean, you gave a lot of good best practices, and I think also sharing an example of how you did that in your works and also in your daily operations. I don't know if you like to add on that, or maybe there's a like related questions that maybe is from Hacker International could help answering that. It was asked by Gigi. I mean, what are important principles in supporting a survivor or his or her journey to healings, restoration, and empowerment? So what are like the top principles? Maybe Zoe, would you like to help on that?
I'm sorry, before we give the floor to Zui, I want to add up more because that right now we have another issue related to the migration or human trafficking because that during COVID-19, very important. Everyone had to pay attention about that. In terms of migration is one of the issue, but all migrant worker returning from Virvat country from Thailand,
Yeah.
you know, those of them, those of them around 50%, I can say, or based on the report from IOM or IGM, more than that, they are trafficked. At least they are trafficked.
Yeah.
Mean that they have something with their working condition, or they have something but they're returning back without nothing here. So at least that is the very big issue for another intervention, another investment that we have to focus on them, and especially for emergency support to them. because right
Yes.
now it returning very big amount, in
Mm.
Patumpong, in my program area, we can say that over 30,000 returning,
Yeah.
over
Wow.
30,000. So lots of only in 5 provinces. That report this
Mm.
morning showed me. I very surprised about that because I track and then compared to the government report, nearly the same. So it means that the government recognize that the returning are very big amount. So that is a very big challenging issue for everyone as well. Okay,
Yeah.
thanks, Zui. Please,
I,
I give the floor to you for the question.
yeah. No, I think that's very
All
important
right.
issues on the migration and COVID-19. I think I would come back to you on that, but maybe now I like the Soy to
Sure.
share what your thoughts on the most important principles in doing this. Yes,
Okay, thank you. So we'll just sort of funnel that down.
exactly. Yeah.
One of my experiences that I had conducting my research with adult survivors of trauma was I had a narrative timeline, as I mentioned in my presentation, and what happened as we were going through these events in terms of the most important for restoration, for empowerment within their story is that of connection. So whether that was a family member, a grandparent, there was also elements of connection in school with peer groups. And so it just went throughout the course of their life. Many of the participants spoke about stigma, spoke about feelings of rejection, of anger, of sadness, of grief. And the balance to that, in terms of stacking the scale, was around those positive connections. Interestingly, many of them had trust issues as a result of what they'd experienced post-trauma. And so it wasn't that I met with young people who had a really huge established peer group, but they had one or two people along the way that were hugely impactful, and then in their lives had managed to connect with a husband, a wife, somebody who understood their story. They'd all told at least one person that was important to them what their story was and gained that acceptance, and then the trust was built from there. So I think that's probably one of the most profound uh, factors in the
Yeah.
restoration and healing and empowerment. Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
I think that's very important. I think maybe to come back to Kosal's on the situation that you mentioned. I think this is one of the most wanted questions, which is what
Yes.
is difficult in your healing and restoration journey? Because I think that's
Okay. Very good. Uh, is a very good
we,
question.
yeah,
That now we can say Labbal challenge. Well, for example, without COVID-19, we have the 10 challenges, but
mm,
after COVID-19 come in, Labbal, I mean 20 challenges.
wow,
I just say like that because that I just want to make easy and simple answer. We have many challenging and also problem in terms of the reason condition of the returnee and reason condition of the economy at the same time. So I can raise some to share with everyone about our experience that we have been working with our survivor. This is only the survivor, but how about others, not our survivors? This is the
mm,
question. How about
yeah,
of them? Now the local market is small, but the big people come in. And you consider before we have only that 1,000 reals is enough for
mm,
one family. But right now, no, 1,000 cannot be enough for one family. It must be 20,000 or 30,000
mm,
because that the member of the family come back because that the garment factory closed and also returnee come from another country, they're coming back to their community. So this is one of the big problem that we have to support them, and also we have no resource, not enough resource
mm,
along with the economic empowerment. I mean that right now we try to promote local enterprise is the part of economic empowerment to our survivor and families and family. We want to make sure that the economy is stable and can live in the community, not return back to the other country or migrate to other country. At least if they want to migrate, must be safe migration. And this is the one of the challenge from we are facing now: lack of resource. We don't have enough resource to make all community family, but we focusing on the survivor and serious survivor, not all kinds of survivors. Second, the big challenge for our implementation as well about the data management. This is the very hard to get the cooperation with the government about the data, the real statistic that I mentioned at the beginning. I was so happy when my report and also the government report really the same. But this is just only that the returnee, not traffic, returnee, not traffic worker. So if you want to intervene, we cannot do it. Real example, one case that our project start working with her. She was trafficked to China. I'm sorry, I don't say China. And she was cheated with raping case as well in Vietnam country. She was trafficked to Vietnam, and then after that, before going to China. But when the case happened in Vietnam, the local authority over there arrested her and sent back her to Cambodia. So when we work with the raping case, we found the traffic case. So this is the one of the challenges for our implementation, because we don't know exactly. Sometime in one survivor, they have been facing the 3 or 4 issue. One raping, one traffic, another one can be another kind of abuse as well. So if we don't have enough information from the we can say the trust sources like the government, and then we will not doing nothing for that here. The third challenge is we are practicing this is about the skillful officer, especially for local authority who are working closely with the returnee, and they can identify who are the traffic. That is the problem. They are hard to identify, because that if we cannot identify them, we are the victim of the survivors. Because sometimes they are not trafficked, but they cheated us. This is the problem happen in our implementation area. And in terms of this, during the COVID-19, they have to come to the quarantine for 14 days. So during the quarantine, we are not able to work with them. So sometimes it's late for us to intervention from another traffic, we can say broker. The broker can run away. Broker can another doing something that we cannot arrest them. This is the problem for during COVID-19 also here. And I think that I don't want to raise more challenging or issue in terms of this, because that if 1 hour for me or 2 hours for me, that's enough.
No, I think you have been giving a very succinct response to that. And maybe Zoe, would you like to add something to that?
Yeah, so once again, going from sort of the macro to the micro, one of the biggest challenges, I believe, is stigma. And this emerged really strongly. So stigma of being a sexual abuse survivor, stigma of being an orphan, stigma of being an NGO kid, sometimes multiple factors or multiple stigmas that a young person might experience. So their ability to reintegrate will either be enhanced or diminished depending on community attitudes and how accepted that they are. So essentially an NGO can be incredibly supportive and arm this individual with all the tools that then begins to unravel depending on what kind of community that they are in and whether they feel supported or not. So I see that as a huge challenge.
Yeah, because I think it's important issue, because it was also asked by Tanny, because Tanny asked, I mean, about trauma and support by family or communities. Can you share like successful methodology to mobilize community to not discriminate or stigmatize the survivor? Because this is something I think is really happen in many communities. But if you have any ways on how to deal with that that you want to share with the audience. Yeah.
Very
I
good.
think it'll be a really slow process, to be honest. I don't think these community attitudes are going to change overnight. And there are various programs that are in place in multiple communities, and even positive parenting, and governments and NGOs really working collaboratively to address some of these bigger issues. But just to share the experiences of one of the survivors that I spoke to, he recounted a lot of his trauma history, which was fairly extensive, like he was reading ingredients off the back of a packet of cereal. He wasn't connected to that. It happened a long time ago. He briefed over it. And then he was talking about how he was placed in a Hagar foster family and he felt love for the first time and they loved him like a son, and his eyes lit up as he was recounting this story. And then he was playing with the kids at school, and other parents came from the community to take their kids away and said, "You can't play with him. He's an orphan. He'll never amount to anything." And as he was telling me, tears welled up in his eyes. And he's now 28 with a family of his own, but it still really stayed with him. So that kind of community perception will be an uphill battle in terms of it taking time, and there's a lot of different players involved in that.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Very good.
So Kosan, would you like to add something to that?
Yes, very important. Why? It's very important, you know, that we thank you. The question is very important for not only Haga, but also for other NGO working in this field. They have to, they are facing with this because mobilization is, be focusing on the resource mobilization, and the resource be focusing on human and financial resource. So I can say I stand on your ideas, Zui, my lovely girl. Thank you. And you know, it's very important that one of the principles that the government's responsibilities and accountability for they have enough resource to support to the traffic worker. So I repeat again, they have to have enough resource, financial and also human to work with traffic worker. It's very important. And right now, based on our approach of working with those local authorities, I can say in the context of the Cambodia, we have the three layer from village, commune, and district. They are at the sub of the provincial level. And every year they have planning. So during the planning session, all village people, include our survivor, include traffic people, include attorney, they have to raise what they want to see, any intervention from the government or from other people to help and to support them. So when they raise in the village level, and they will consolidate it in this commune level, and then after they have planning, the government will allocate the budget for this planning.
Yeah.
But the issue is that we cannot make sure all village or commune are paying attention on this issue that we are discussing. They mostly paying attention on infrastructure or something different from this special on the returnee or special on the traffic people. That is one of the result mobilization that we can ask from the government. Secondly, our approach working today, we focusing on the CSO network member, mean that we're working as a network here. As the Hega is the chair of the one of the network in Northwest Zone in 5 provinces. We are the chair of this. I am the chair of this. So you know, when we have mapping out all network member, we are easy to refer. And we are easy to collect all information and also all resources that we have in hand to support on time emergency to that as a survivor. So this is very important approach that we apply in, and we think that it can be helpful, or it can be one of the principle for making the survivor come back or recover. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, excellent. I think that's very helpful. And maybe looking at the models of the service providers, some are using like resort center to provide support service to survivor. But I think the question asked by Jesse is that how do we monitor and ensure that the trafficking survivor to have their fullness of life if they already reunited with their family, so they are no longer with the center, but they are with the family. Do you have any suggestion on that?
Okay. Let me repeat the question. The question is
Yeah,
focusing in that here, the survivor now stop living in the center and they come back to the family, right?
yeah, they are with the family.
Yes.
Yes,
How the mechanism to monitor, right?
yes,
Yes,
yes.
this is the one of the last point. Last point. Every NGO working in this field, they hope all survivors will come back to the community. That we call reintegration. And during the reintegration, that is one of the recommendation I want to give everyone as well here, based on our experience. You know, many NGO, I don't blame to any NGO, but many NGO, they have been working with only the survivor during they are in the center, or during they are come back for 1, 2, 3 months in the family, and they close the case, and then they stop working at all with the closed case. So when they close the case, mean that they hope that the survivor are resilient, a survivor or recover, something like that here. And we don't continue any follow-up action or monitoring. But this is one of the black point that we have to
Yeah,
consider. But for us, we working with this the closed case survivor, and we continue to monitor and continue to counseling with them any kind of issue until they become ours the witness, or become ours the we can say that a speaker, and we invited them to come to speak to the survivor as well, to make sure that they are able to live without any kind of thing. That's why we stop working with them, but we still build connection. So one of the approach is that here connection with the closed case and also the survivor that come back to their community. Second point, recently in the COVID-19 infection, when you focusing on only that the survivor and you forget focusing on the family, this is the problem as well. Yeah, the problem here, because that the family will not be able to support the survivor at all after we move out our projects. So be careful here. This is the approach of working from our current practice as well. Okay, thank you very much.
yeah, yes. So, Zoe, would you like to add on that? I mean, how can we monitor those survivors who are with their family?
In a perfect world, the monitoring and evaluation would be done, as Kosal suggested, over a much more extended period of time. But of course, funding for projects and things like that sometimes doesn't allow for extensive sort of once that case is closed. What I did find, however, with Hagar is that there was a level of comfortability with a lot of the survivors who would pop up and still talk to clinicians many years later. I remember that one of the librarians at Hagar, for example, once told me she sometimes has some of her now very grown adults waiting at the door with some flowers for her. So this is sort of feeding into one of the other comments or questions around, is it impactful in terms of the NGO? And so ideally, yes, that monitoring and evaluation would be ongoing, but sometimes it hasn't been. With some of Hagar's survivors, they were in fact part of the organisation, or at least supported through the education, because that's also really helpful, as having an ongoing sort of support system. So even though they were reintegrated, they were still linked in to the Hagar network. And that certainly wasn't a case of 2 years, we're done, like it is with a lot of, unfortunately, it is funding. But yeah, so when the survivors felt that they could still keep in contact with those key people, whether it's a librarian or their counsellor or a teacher, that was quite helpful for them. So it was informal check-ins, I suppose, over an extended period of time that still occurs with NGOs that have been working in the field in various regions for an extended period of time.
Yes, I think that's very much answered the questions which asked, as you mentioned, related to how the organizations be part of the journey of the survivor and how that impact their life. So because I think you have been working together with the survivor for many years and for a long time. So I think you can also maybe share on how that impact their life journey. Kosa?
Okay, good. Thank you. It is not very different from the our current practice, and also our, we can say, the achievement or my the answering in the first and the beginning as well here. You know, it is the very important that our working approach, I can say our working approach, and also our service, our manner, our attitude, our communication are the main of the point that we have to be careful and we have to be trained professionally, because that social worker in Cambodia, you know, I can say that not NGO but social worker in Cambodia license from the Ministry of the Social Affairs, just a few people only. So how can we find the result to work with those survivors? Not easy. That is the one of the point that how can we engage the government? How can we engage the result from outside to have all those survivors living or the standard of the they are living in the community? And I'm not clear about just the main of the purpose of the question. They want to know about our experience on the survival life, our approach of working, or what's else. What can you help me about that?
Well, the way I understand is that, I mean, I think the person who asked the questions would like to know how would the life of the survivor be impacted by the organizations that help them? Would that be helpful in having the organization that be with them all the way during their journey, and that would support in like positive impact on their life journey for being the survivor? Yeah.
Okay.
Can I jump in there? Because this is a really interesting area of the research as well, around creating dependence versus support and empowerment. And I think sometimes it can be a fine line where we don't want to be creating this dependence. We want that person to move forward in their life and build these resilience skills. So I think it's dependent on, one, the programs, but also sometimes the individual. Some individuals will need more support for a longer period of time in order to ensure that they can essentially fly off and create these lives for themselves, whereas others are fiercely independent and have been very self-reliant during their childhood, essentially because they've been forced to. So they may have some very survivalist type skills where they require a lack of, or less support, not lack. And so I think having a scenario where it is very much case by case, one thing that I've really found beautiful when I was conducting these interviews in Hagar offices, I would sometimes see the participants walk in and they'd see their old social worker, for example, and their eyes would light up. And so in terms of impact, on a really individual level, it can be incredibly profound. So for these young people to have someone say, I believe in you, when they've experienced so much trauma and so much disconnection. So to come back to that question, it's hard to sort of pinpoint whether that will be this person at that time, but I would argue never to underestimate the impact that people working with survivors at the front line have in terms of being a part of their journey and being a part of their story.
Yeah.
Wait, I would like to jump in because that's very important here. One point that we can say that a positive impact from the survival life. Since Haga started our project implementation, 0 survivor who have been re-traumatized. So mean that, and also who have not been re-trafficked, mean that after we closed, after the whole junior support, and it become a normal life in social communities. So this is one of these impact from our individual support. But at least for the holistic approach for Haga, we focusing on not dependency all the time to the Haga. That is why networking, another resource of family and community and the government, they are the part of this to make the survival life sustain. And also the support from them is very important, not depend on the Haga only here. This is the change from the survival life here.
That's great. I think we are about to finish our sessions, but I mean there are many good questions that came in. So I think I'd just like to pick on maybe one or two more questions before we end this, and then if you can answer them, that would be great. I think this is one interesting question. I mean, as Kosal just mentioned about the sustainability. Kim Sen Jidong, if I pronounce correctly, asked these questions about how can the economic opportunity linkages for the survivor be more strengthened? As most of the time, these linkages have been weak, considering the access to livelihood opportunity, major factors in the reintegration and sustenance of the survivor. What are the areas that non-profit can concentrate in leveraging these linkages? So I think it's more about the economic opportunity to help the survivor to sustain by themselves, and how can the NGOs be a part of that? Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you for this question. This raising the question this morning during the provincial workshop from human trafficking. Also, they raised about this issue as well. How can we support survivor by economic supporting? You know, talking back for this is very important that right now, one of the big concerning about the skill and knowledge of our traffic survivors. I mean, some survivor, they have been trafficked for longer than their school age. So they come back, they have no skill at all in their body. They have no knowledge. If we send them back to school, no, they cannot get the meaning of the classroom. Grade 1 or 2, they can start. How can they start? Because they are still old right now. So only want the opportunity for economic empowering project from HEGA. We try to work with them on the career counseling. We mean that we have to work with them about any kind of their talents, their experience, and we add up to them to make sure they become a skill, they become a professional, and then we try to find a job for them. This is our linkage from the economic empowering to the survival life. Second point, because HEGA had a project to work with the supplier chains, mean that we one hand we work with this company or working with this the demand side, and another side we work with the survivor to make this respond to the demand side. So when they have any point that we can come together, we will put them together to study, learn, and work. This is the approach of the linkage to the economic to the survival life. Another point is very important as well, that our practice is very good point. I can be shared with you all as well. Promoting local enterprise is much more important than find the big company, find the big place. This is our successful way to work with the communities survivor as well from traffic. I mean that, for example, the fishery industry, that we came back from the sea. In Cambodia, we don't have the sea industry anymore here. So, but in their community, they have the play for fish, freshwater fish production or something like that. So they have some skill and some knowledge. We add up to support more, and then they can use their skill to live in the community, to work in the community, and promote more income. That is our linkage, and just a small size, small resource that we have. But we will bring this approach, bring this model to be discussed at the national level for law enforcement, for any kind of intervention from the related department of the provincial department of working or the provincial department of the social affairs. Okay, this is the one of they can share to you all for the question. I hope it can be answered.
Yeah, I think that answered very well. Thank you, Kosal. So if you don't have anything to add to that, maybe I would just like to ask on, I think there are many audience who ask about how they can access information, the research, or the work of the Hakka, and how they would be able to follow up the discussions with you on this. So if you would be able to suggest them on that, please.
Sure, absolutely. So both Corsal and I will be continuing to answer chat conversations and messages that people send through this platform. But also I've got some links to multiple articles that I've written around my research stemming over the last few years with Hagar International. And if you look at my bio, you'll find links to those on ResearchGate.
Yeah, thank you, Zoe. So for the audience, I mean, you have many questions, but I think given the time limited, I think we have done our best to answer your questions. But as Zoe mentions that, I mean, both Kosal and Zoe are very good to reply to your questions. So I think they would do that after this. So I would like to give you, both of you, a few words to wrap up this Q&A sessions. That's the last word for this. Please, Zoe, would you like to start?
I have no idea how to answer that question. How do I just wrap this up?
In a few
It's
words.
a very, very big area. So I'm not quite sure in a few words how I can summarize. Other than that, it's been a pleasure to be involved in this conference. I've learned a lot. It's been a really exciting new step in terms of the technology and having the opportunity to share the amazing work that Hagar does in the field, and working with Corsal always has been delightful. So thank you.
Thank you, Zoe. So please, Kosal.
Okay, I have four points that I would share to be shared for the last not recap, but this is the kind of thing I can share to all of you. I think very important. First point is everything we have to best interest of the survivors. Everyone discussing, everyone doing something, you have to put this in the middle of the table, and then you can find the benefit to the survivors. Second point, you have to promote the survivor lives through our quality intervention and success. Not only one-off action or not echo action only here, but you have to have the mechanism to monitor, mechanism to follow up, mechanism to support them anytime they need, because they are not, they are the kind of vulnerable group. They are the kind of high risk people. Okay, they are the high risk people. Third, I think transparency and professionalism on supporting. So this is very important here, and everyone have to consider about that here. And the last point, I think that every people you have to consider about meaningful engagement and involvement of the survivor. Every part of the project, every part of your decision, every part of their life. We have to consult, we have to engage them meaningfully, participation from survivor. Okay, that's all. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, fantastic. Both of you have been amazing. Thank you for your work, and thank you for the presentations. Thanks to the audience for these questions and lively discussion, interaction during this session. So thank you all, and see you. Yep. Take care. Thank you.
Okay. Yes. Thank you. Thank you.